The kingdom of Urindor had always been a land of twilight. Its castles rose like jagged teeth against a sky that never fully brightened, as if the sun itself feared to linger there. Mist clung to the valleys, and the wind whispered secrets no one dared speak aloud. Once, Urindor had been ruled by light and laughter. Now it trembled beneath shadow and fear. Lord Kalin moved silently through the ruins of his family's estate. The halls, once alive with music and laughter, were now silent, haunted by the echoes of a massacre that had left him the only survivor. The walls were scarred, the floors slick with years of neglect, yet he walked with the careful precision of one who had seen death too closely to ignore it. His eyes, sharp and storm-gray, scanned every corner, searching for memories and dangers alike. Kalen's return to the capital was not for revenge, though he would not deny the fire that burned in his chest. He came to reclaim what had been stolen, his family, his name, his throne, but the path was treacherous. Dark forces moved in the city, hidden in the shadows, waiting for him to slip. And worst of all, someone new had risen to power, someone whose very presence made his heart both ache and tremble, Queen Seraphine. She had married the new king in a ceremony of golden light and silent tears. But Kalen had heard rumors. She had orders, secret and deadly, to find him and destroy him. And yet when he first glimpsed her at the cathedral, standing tall and composed beneath the glittering chandeliers, his breath caught. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she carried a weight he knew well, the burden of duty that clashed with desire, the silent sorrow behind her regal mask. The night Kalen approached the cathedral, the wind howled through the streets, carrying the scent of rain and candle smoke. He waited in the shadows, unseen, watching Seraphine as she spoke prayers aloud, her voice trembling just enough to betray her resolve. She did not know he was near. She prayed not for victory over him, but for something else, something softer, hidden, almost human. Kalen's lips curved into a small, bitter smile. He knew then that she was not entirely the enemy he had feared. But he could not let that knowledge make him weak. If she truly had orders to end him, he would have to be ready. And yet, a strange longing tugged at him, whispering that perhaps she too was trapped in a web she did not fully understand. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind him. A dagger glinted in the dim light, and Kalen spun just in time to block the strike. His blade met the attacker, with a clash of steel, sparks flying into the wet stones of the street. He could not see the face beneath the hood, but the strength behind the blow told him this was no ordinary assassin. The fight was brief but brutal. Kalen's years of training had honed him into a weapon precise and deadly. The attacker fell, leaving a trail of blood in the mist, and Kalen realized with a cold certainty that this was only the beginning. The council had not forgotten him, and they were preparing to strike again. Kalen paused, chest heaving, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. The city around him was silent, but he knew it was a fragile silence. Every shadow could conceal a spy, every alley could hide a trap, yet he could not turn back, not now, not ever. The next morning the sun, faint and reluctant, rose over the rooftops. Kalen slipped into the market square, blending with the crowd. Merchants shouted over the clatter of wagons, and children ran past, laughing, unaware of the dangers that prowled in the streets. He studied Seraphine's palace from a distance, the tall spires rising like swords into the sky. Somewhere inside she waited, bound by orders and perhaps by something more. Kalen remembered the stories his mother had told him as a boy, tales of queens who wielded power with both mercy and fire, of princes who were brave enough to challenge fate itself. He wondered if Seraphine had heard the same stories, if she knew what it meant to walk the line between duty and desire. That evening, Kalen dared to enter the palace gardens under the cover of twilight. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the fountains sparkled faintly in the fading light. He moved with caution, aware that guards could appear at any moment. And there she was, Seraphine. She stood beneath an archway of roses, her eyes closed, whispering words that sent shivers down his spine. Kalen stepped forward, careful not to make a sound. She did not notice him at first, lost in the rhythm of her prayer. Then, a slight movement, a shift in the air, and her eyes snapped open. They were like twin flames in the darkness, sharp and piercing. For a moment they simply stared at each other, the space between them charged with tension that neither could name. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "And yet I am," Kalen replied, stepping closer, the moonlight catching the edge of his blade, though he held it at his side. "I could ask the same of you. Are you here to find me or to curse me?" She had been trained to kill him, yet something in his presence reminded her of who she once had been, of who she wanted to be. Duty demanded one thing, her heart whispered another. "You do not understand," she said at last, her voice barely audible. "I have responsibilities." "You hesitate, because even if you are the instrument of my death, I cannot ignore the truth in your eyes." Before she could respond, a sudden noise shattered the fragile tension, a rustling in the bushes, the softest of whispers carried by the wind. Kalen spun, sword ready, but there was nothing there. Only the sense that they were being watched, that danger lingered closer than either of them dared admit. Seraphine's hand hovered near the dagger at her belt, an instinctive gesture that betrayed her training. "You should leave," she whispered. "Now. Or something in between. And not from what we might become." Kalen studied her for a long moment, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the haunted fire in her eyes, the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she gripped her dagger. He knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, filled with betrayal, blood, and the shadows of the past. And yet, he also knew that in her presence there was a spark, something that might survive even the darkest night. The first drops of rain began to fall, splattering against the cobblestones and the petals of the roses around them. Kalen made his choice. He would wait, he would watch, and he would speak the words that might awaken her heart, even if it meant risking everything. But before he could take another step, a sudden shadow moved across the garden wall. A hooded figure emerged, dagger gleaming, and Kalen realized with a sinking heart that the council had not forgotten him. They were closer than he imagined. He turned, ready to defend himself, while Seraphine drew her dagger, the weight of her orders heavy in her hands. For a brief, breathless moment, they stood together, enemies by duty, yet bound by something far more dangerous, the undeniable pull between their hearts. The clash of steel rang out into the night, echoing through the gardens, a prelude to the war that would soon engulf them both. And in that moment, Kalen understood a truth he could not ignore. In Urindor, love and death were inseparable, and the shadows of the past were only the beginning. The night was far from over, and neither of them would leave unchanged. The moon had disappeared behind a veil of storm clouds, leaving the city of Urindor under a dim, silver-gray light. Rain had begun to fall, cold and relentless, soaking the cobblestones and carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant fires. The clash of steel from the previous night still rang in Kalen's ears, though his wounds had been tended by shadows far quieter than the palace guards. He had survived barely, thanks to an unexpected ally, a rogue mage named Thalric, whose debts to Kalen's family ran deeper than memory alone. Thalric's magic was strange and wild, like the pulse of lightning trapped in water. He had healed Kalen and whispered words of caution. The council's reach was longer than Kalen imagined, and Queen Seraphine's obedience was not absolute. Kalen sat in the corner of a hidden chamber beneath the city, listening to the rain hammering the streets above. His hand traced the scar along his arm where the blade had cut him. Pain was familiar to him. It had become part of his existence. But it was not the pain of the body that weighed heaviest. It was the knowledge that every step forward carried the risk of betrayal, the risk that Seraphine might be the very weapon meant to end him. He rose, cloak dripping with water, and made his way to a small window overlooking the palace gardens. There she was, Seraphine, standing under the cold drizzle, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes lifted to the heavens as if seeking answers from a sky that offered none. She did not see him, yet he felt the weight of her gaze as if it had reached through walls and stone. Seraphine returned to her chambers after the rain had passed, drenched and silent. Her body ached with the tension of the past night, but it was the burden on her heart that truly made her shiver. Kalen was alive, she knew. That knowledge should have terrified her, yet it stirred something unfamiliar, an impulse to protect, to see him survive, even though duty demanded his death. Her advisors whispered constantly, warning her that hesitation could be fatal. The council's power was absolute, their patience as long as it was cruel. If she faltered, the throne itself could crumble beneath her. And yet, every time she thought of Kalen, she felt the sharp tug of something forbidden, a bond she could not explain, a connection that went beyond orders and politics. That night, Kalen decided he could wait no longer. He had watched her, studied her movements, and understood that she was more than a queen carrying out deadly instructions. She was a prisoner of her own loyalty, a woman whose heart had been hidden behind golden chains. He would speak to her, risk everything, and see if truth could break through the walls that duty had built around her. The next morning, Kalen disguised himself as a servant and entered the palace under the guise of delivering messages. The corridors were silent, except for the occasional clatter of boots and the rustle of robes. Every shadow seemed to carry a threat, but Kalen moved with the grace of a man who had learned to survive in darkness. In the gardens, Seraphine walked alone, her fingers brushing the leaves of the rose bushes, as if searching for comfort in their fragile beauty. She had seen him before in fleeting glimpses, but she had not expected him to enter the palace. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, though that was present, but from something far more complicated. Kalen stepped out from behind a marble pillar and she froze. For a moment they simply regarded each other, the silence heavy with unspoken questions. "You should not be here," she said softly, her voice steady yet tinged with uncertainty. "And yet I am," Kalen replied, his gray eyes catching the early light. "I have questions, and I think you do too." She had been trained to kill him, to see him as an enemy, but here he was, alive and in front of her, not with anger but with an honesty that unsettled her. I am bound," she whispered. "Bound by oath, by duty, by the council's orders. You cannot understand. But I also see hesitation in you, and that tells me you do not wish to kill me." Kalen took another step closer until the space between them was charged with the tension of unspoken desire. "Tell me," he said softly. "Why do you hesitate? Are you my enemy or something more?" He was not the monster the council had painted. He was alive, human, flawed, and frighteningly compelling. She began, then faltered, her voice caught in her throat. "I do not know. Do you wish to be a queen bound by orders, or a woman who decides her own path?" But the council's shadow loomed large, and the world outside the garden was unforgiving. Before she could respond, the softest rustle reached their ears, a sound that made both of them tense. Kalen turned, sword at the ready, while Seraphine drew her dagger instinctively. The bushes shivered, and a hooded figure emerged, dagger glinting in the morning light. Kalen recognized the attack immediately, the council's assassin, trained to kill silently, swiftly, and without mercy. He met the strike with his blade, parrying the deadly thrust, and the clash rang out like thunder in the silent garden. Seraphine moved beside him, surprising even herself with the instinct to protect rather than obey. Together they fought, a silent rhythm of steel and motion, each aware of the other's movements, each depending on the other for survival. The assassin faltered, giving Kalen the opening he needed. With a swift strike, he disarmed the attacker, leaving the figure unconscious in the wet grass. For a moment, Kalen and Seraphine stood facing each other, rain dripping from their hair, clothes soaked, hearts pounding from more than just exertion. "You see," Kalen said, his voice low but steady, "even in this we can survive, together." "Together," she echoed, almost as if tasting the word, tasting the possibility that duty might not be the only path. They left the garden, side by side, knowing that the council's reach would follow them. Every step through the city streets carried the weight of danger, but also the faintest spark of something neither had dared name. Kalen began to realize that Seraphine was not merely an obstacle. She could be an ally, perhaps the only one who could understand the depth of his loss and the fire of his vengeance. Seraphine, for her part, felt the strange stirring of trust and fear. Trust because he had saved her as much as she had saved him, fear because each step toward him was also a step toward rebellion. Each heartbeat carried a question. Could she obey the council and survive? Could she betray them and survive? Could she resist the pull of her own heart? By nightfall, they found themselves in a quiet courtyard hidden from the city's prying eyes. The stars had begun to pierce the darkness, pale and trembling as if afraid to witness what was unfolding below. Kalen spoke first. "There is more at stake than either of us realize. The council's orders, the death of my family, it is all part of something larger, and if we do not act carefully, we will both fall. Together, two hearts, two lives, facing a world built on lies, betrayal, and darkness. Together meant survival, but also danger. Together meant trust, but also risk." And then Kalen stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "There is something I must tell you, something from the night of your wedding." "What do you mean?" The rain began again, soft and insistent, washing over them, as if the heavens themselves were witnessing the fragile bond forming between two hearts in a kingdom built on shadows. Kalen took her hand lightly, almost reverently. "I do not come for vengeance tonight. I come to remind you that the past can be faced, the chains can be broken, and the heart can choose." Somewhere in the city, the council stirred, and their plans would not be so easily thwarted. The assassin who had failed tonight would not be the last. Kalen and Seraphine would have to act carefully, or they would be consumed by the shadows that sought to control them both. For now, though they remained in the courtyard, hands lightly entwined, hearts beating in uneasy synchrony, aware that the path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and full of choices that could change everything. The storm over Urindor had passed, leaving behind a city washed in silver light, as though the rain had scoured not only the streets but the weight of guilt and fear that clung to its people. Kalen and Seraphine moved through the quiet alleys, careful to avoid the eyes of the council's spies. Each step was a test of trust, each glance between them a silent negotiation of loyalty and longing. Kalen's wounds had healed enough for him to walk without limping, though his mind was restless. He could not stop thinking of the words he had spoken to Seraphine the night before, and the trembling of her hand when he had mentioned her secret vow. That knowledge bound them in a fragile alliance, one that might survive the council's relentless pursuit, or shatter under pressure. Seraphine walked beside him, her expression thoughtful, her fingers brushing absent-mindedly along the hilt of her dagger. The palace that had once felt so imposing now seemed a cage she had willingly stepped out of, and every step away from it was both liberation and defiance. She was painfully aware that with every act of rebellion she risked everything she had ever known, the crown, her safety, and the loyalty of the people she had sworn to serve. "You should rest," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "You cannot fight the council and survive if you exhaust yourself before the real battle begins. Do you ever let yourself hope?" The council's influence extended like roots beneath the stones, and they could never truly escape its reach. Yet Kalen and Seraphine pressed on, moving toward the old forest that bordered the kingdom, a place where whispers of magic and ancient curses lingered in the air, and where the rules of kings and councils held less sway. As they entered the forest, the shadows deepened, wrapping around them like a protective cloak. The trees were tall and ancient, their branches intertwined, forming tunnels of darkness and light. Kalen led the way, sword drawn, senses alert to the slightest movement. Seraphine followed closely, her dagger ready, but her mind distracted by the strange calm that seemed to settle over the forest. "This place," she murmured, "it feels alive, as if it knows we are here." Yet despite the quiet, the forest seemed to breathe with secrets. Shadows shifted in ways that suggested eyes watching from the darkness, and the air hummed with energy that was almost palpable. After several hours, they came upon the ruins of an old temple, long abandoned and overgrown with vines. The stone walls were cracked, and the altar at its center was broken, yet the place radiated power. Kalen stepped inside cautiously, his eyes scanning every corner. Seraphine followed, feeling a mixture of awe and unease. "This temple," she whispered, touching the cracked stone, "it feels like it remembers something. As if it knows what we seek. You believe it is real. If we falter, we are lost." They began to search the temple, uncovering hidden passages and chambers filled with relics of the past. Dust covered ancient tomes and broken artifacts, remnants of a time when magic had been stronger, purer, and less corrupted by power. Kalen found a scroll, brittle and faded, and unfurled it carefully. The words inscribed upon it spoke of the bloodline curse, the council's manipulation, and the role that two souls bound by destiny could play in ending it. Seraphine leaned over his shoulder, her fingers brushing his hand as she pointed to a passage. "It says, the one who unites the cursed bloodlines can break the darkness, but the price is sacrifice and trust. Sacrifice, we have already given so much. If we fail, we lose everything anyway. But if we succeed, perhaps we can restore more than just a name. Perhaps we can restore hope." She had been trained to obey, to kill, to survive. Yet here with Kalen, she realized that the rules she had lived by no longer applied. Suddenly, a distant howl echoed through the trees. Kalen's hand went to his sword instinctively, and Seraphine's dagger was ready in her grasp. "We are not alone," Kalen said, his voice low. "The council has sent others, or worse. Creatures bound to their will." Kalen parried the strike, the clang of steel echoing through the temple ruins. Seraphine joined the fight, her dagger finding its mark against the attacker's arm. Together, they moved in a rhythm that was both instinctive and practiced, a dance of survival that bound them closer with each passing moment. When the figure finally fell, unconscious, Kalen and Seraphine stood together, breathing heavily, their clothes damp with rain and sweat. The danger had passed for now, but the threat remained. The council would not rest, and the assassin's failure would only make them more determined. They sat by the altar, the weight of the fight settling over them like a cloak. Kalen broke the silence first. "Do you understand now? The council fears what we can become together. They fear the breaking of chains they have worked so long to forge. We face the council, the curse, and whatever else lies ahead. And we do not falter, not for them, not for the past, not for fear. For the first time, Kalen felt a strange sense of hope, not certainty, but the fragile possibility that even in a world built on betrayal and darkness, two hearts could forge a path forward. Seraphine leaned against him, her forehead resting lightly against his shoulder. I never thought I could choose. But with you, it feels possible. They knew the council would come, that the dangers of the city would not vanish, and that the path ahead was fraught with peril. Yet in that quiet moment they were not enemies, nor bound solely by duty. They were allies and perhaps something more. And then from the deepest shadows of the temple, a faint, almost imperceptible sound stirred. Kalen's eyes narrowed, the familiar edge of danger sharpening his senses. Seraphine tensed beside him. They are here, he whispered, voice tight. The council's reach is closer than we thought. And now they know we are not alone. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. The chains of their hearts had begun to loosen, yet the shadows of the past and the dangers of the council threatened to bind them again. Urindor was a land of twilight, and their journey had only just begun. The dawn rose slowly over Urindor, painting the kingdom in shades of gold and gray. Mist lingered in the valleys, and the towers of the palace cast long shadows across the city streets. Yet in the quiet of the morning there was a subtle promise, a flicker of hope that the kingdom had not entirely succumbed to darkness. Kalen and Seraphine moved through the outskirts of the city, their footsteps silent on the damp stones. Their journey had taken them from the shadowed palace corridors to the ancient forest, and now toward the council's fortress, a looming structure of black stone and iron, filled with secrets, betrayal, and power that corrupted even the noblest hearts. The air was tense, filled with the unspoken knowledge that this confrontation could cost them everything. Yet Kalen's resolve was unshakable. He had lost too much already to falter now. His family's name, his rightful place, and the hope of breaking the curse that had haunted their bloodlines all demanded courage. Seraphine walked beside him, her eyes bright with determination, though her heart trembled beneath the weight of duty and fear. Every step closer to the council's stronghold reminded her of the dangers she had defied. She had chosen to act with Kalen, yet the council's spies and assassins were everywhere. One wrong move could end them both. You are quiet, Kalen said softly, his voice cutting through the stillness of the morning. I am thinking, Seraphine replied, about what comes next, about what we risk, about us. There was no fear in his gaze, only acknowledgement of what had been growing between them, a connection forged through danger, trust, and the faintest spark of hope. I know it is not simple, and I know the council would punish us both for it, but I also know that I cannot turn away, not now, not ever. She had been trained to obey, to sacrifice, to suppress her feelings. Yet here, beside Kalen, she understood that some bonds could not be ignored, that love and duty were not always mutually exclusive, and that the strength to defy the council came from choosing what was right, not merely what was commanded. They reached the gates of the council's fortress as the sun broke through the clouds, casting the dark towers in light and shadow. The gates, tall and wrought with iron, seemed impenetrable, yet Kalen's hand brushed against a hidden mechanism, one that Thalric had shown him in secret. A soft click sounded, and the massive doors creaked open, revealing the shadows within. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, carrying the scent of burning incense and old, powerful magic. The halls were lined with guards, their faces unreadable beneath helmets and masks. Kalen and Seraphine moved carefully, relying on the knowledge they had gathered in the forest and the trust they had forged. Every step was a delicate balance of stealth and courage. At the center of the fortress, in a grand chamber adorned with tapestries depicting the history of Urindor, the council awaited. Their eyes were sharp, cold, and calculating, each member exuding authority and menace. Kalen stepped forward, sword in hand, and Seraphine followed, her dagger gleaming in the dim light. You dare return, the council's head demanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. After all that has been done to you, after all the power we have claimed, you stand here defiant. The curse that binds our families, the treachery that claimed my blood, the lies you have spread, they end tonight, and I will not be silenced. The people deserve more than shadows and obedience. They deserve justice and freedom. The council raised their hands, summoning dark energy that coiled like living smoke around their fingers. The temperature dropped, and the walls of the chamber seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Kalen stepped forward, placing himself between the council and Seraphine. "Whatever you send," he said, voice steady, "we face it together." Together they moved with a rhythm born of trust and shared purpose, each covering the other, each anticipating the next strike. The battle was relentless, a dance of shadows and fire, steel and spell. Kalen could feel the weight of the past pressing against him, the memories of his family's death fueling his determination. Seraphine felt the pull of destiny, the knowledge that this moment could shape not only their future, but the future of the entire kingdom. As the council's magic began to waver under their combined strength, Kalen reached for a hidden blade, one imbued with ancient power. The blade hummed in his hand, responding to his intent, and with a precise strike he severed the source of the council's dark energy. The chamber shook, stone cracking and dust falling from the ceiling. Seraphine moved beside him, her dagger catching a final attack and turning it aside. Together they stood, breathless, in the center of the chamber. The council members, drained and powerless, glared at them, their authority shattered. Kalen's eyes met Seraphine's, and in that glance there was both relief and understanding. They had faced the council and survived, but the victory was not without cost. The chamber was scarred, the magic spent, and their strength tested to its limits. Yet amidst the ruin there was a spark, a reminder that even in darkness, redemption was possible. Seraphine stepped closer, her hand reaching for Kalen's. "We did it," she whispered, a mixture of awe and exhaustion in her voice. "Together we did it. The curse is broken, but the world beyond this fortress is still dangerous. We must be ready." They had won a crucial battle, but the kingdom of Urindor was a place of endless intrigue, and new threats would arise. Yet for the first time they felt something more than fear or duty. They felt hope. They felt the possibility that love, trust, and courage could forge a path through even the deepest darkness. Kalen turned to Seraphine, his gray eyes softening. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "I could not have faced them without you." The air was crisp and filled with the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. Urindor stretched out before them, a kingdom scarred but not defeated, a realm where shadows still lingered but where hope had returned. Kalen and Seraphine walked side by side, their hands brushing, fingers entwining in silent agreement. They knew that challenges remained, that enemies lurked in every corner, and that the path ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. Yet for the first time in years, they faced the future not with fear, but with determination, and with each other. As they reached the edge of the city, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a promise of renewal and change. The curse that had haunted their bloodlines had been broken, but the lessons of the past lingered. Trust, courage, and the willingness to defy fear were the true keys to redemption, and they had found them in one another. Kalen looked down at Seraphine, his hand tightening gently around hers. "We have faced fire, shadow, and betrayal," he said softly. "And yet here we are. Stronger together, ready for whatever comes next." Kalen and Seraphine walked forward side by side, aware that their journey was not over, but confident that their bond would guide them. And in the distance, beyond the horizon, faint shadows stirred, reminders that Urindor was a land of twilight where danger and hope existed side by side. Kalen and Seraphine knew that the world would test them again, but they were no longer alone. Together, they had found the courage to challenge fate, the strength to break chains, and the power to face the darkness without surrendering their hearts. The flames of redemption burned brightly in their souls, and for the first time they allowed themselves to believe that love, courage, and hope could triumph, even in a kingdom built on shadows. The wind howled across the hills of Urindor, carrying with it the scent of smoke and the distant roar of battle. The kingdom, once silent under the weight of shadows, now trembled with the fury of those who refused to surrender. Kalen and Seraphine rode together, their cloaks whipping around them, eyes fixed on the fortress where the council had retreated after their last defeat. The journey to the council's stronghold was perilous. Spies and assassins still roamed the streets, and remnants of the dark magic that had once bound the kingdom lingered in the air. Yet Kalen rode with determination, his sword at his side and the weight of his family's legacy driving him forward. Beside him, Seraphine held her dagger tightly, her mind focused, her heart steady despite the fear that always hovered close. "This is the last step," Kalen said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "We face them, all of them, and we end this. Tonight, Urindor will either be free or we will fall trying. No matter what comes, we do it side by side." The trees, ancient and watchful, seemed to bend around them, offering protection and secrecy in equal measure. Inside, the council waited. They had anticipated this confrontation, and their confidence radiated like heat. The chamber was vast, with ceilings that disappeared into darkness, and the walls adorned with sigils that pulsed with power. At the center, the head of the council stood, flanked by the remaining members, their expressions a mix of anger, surprise, and calculated menace. "You return," the council leader said, his voice cold as steel. "After all we have done, you dare to challenge us again." "We return," he said evenly, "because your reign of fear ends today. The curse you have wielded, the lies you have spread, the lives you have ruined, they end now, and you will answer for them. The people of Urindor deserve truth, and they deserve freedom." Dark tendrils of energy shot toward them, twisting and writhing as if alive. Kalen parried with his sword, the ancient blade humming in response to the magic, while Seraphine deflected smaller attacks, her dagger glowing faintly with the magic she had inherited through the bloodline. They moved as one, anticipating each strike, covering each other with instinctive precision. Every clash of steel and spark of magic brought them closer, their bond strengthened by trust, skill, and the knowledge that neither could face this alone. The council's leader unleashed his full power, a torrent of darkness that threatened to consume the chamber. Kalen and Seraphine braced themselves, their hands briefly brushing in a gesture that was more than support. It was a promise. Together they would face this, or fall trying. Kalen focused, calling upon the magic of his bloodline, the strength of his ancestors, and the fire of his will. Seraphine did the same, her voice rising in a chant of protection and power. Their combined force created a shield that met the council's darkness head-on, holding it at bay. Sparks of light and shadow danced across the chamber, the air thick with energy and tension. Then Kalen made his move. With a precise strike, he severed the magical sigil that fed the council's power, disrupting the flow of energy. Seraphine, anticipating his actions, joined him, her dagger striking a final blow that shattered the last of the council's defenses. The chamber shook, stone cracking under the strain, and the council staggered, powerless at last. Kalen and Seraphine stood together, breathing heavily, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The council, defeated and drained, glared at them, their authority extinguished. The kingdom, for the first time in generations, felt the possibility of freedom. Kalen turned to Seraphine, his gray eyes soft with exhaustion and pride. "It is done," he said. "The council's power is broken, the curse it is lifted." "Together," he repeated, "and now we face what comes next. The kingdom must heal, and so must we." The city below was waking. People stepped into the streets, eyes wide with wonder and hope. Word would spread quickly. The council was defeated, the queen had stood against them, and the prince had returned. Urindor, battered but unbroken, had a chance to begin anew. Kalen and Seraphine walked through the streets, hand in hand, feeling the weight of the journey they had completed. Every glance, every brush of their fingers reminded them of the trials they had faced and the bond that had been forged through fire and shadow. "You were magnificent," Kalen said softly. "I could not have done this without you. You reminded me that courage, trust, and love matter, even in a kingdom ruled by fear." The people would look to them now, not only as rulers, but as symbols of what courage and unity could achieve. Seraphine squeezed his hand. "We will face it together," she said. "Whatever comes, we do it side by side." The past had been cruel, filled with loss and betrayal, but they had overcome it. Together, they were stronger than the darkness that had threatened to consume them. The council, though defeated, had left its mark. Rumors of lingering shadows persisted, whispers of those who still sought to claim power through deceit and fear. Kalen and Seraphine knew they could not let their guard down. But the trials they had faced had shown them something greater, that love, trust, and courage could withstand even the darkest of forces. That evening, under the first full moon since their victory, Kalen and Seraphine stood on the balcony of the restored palace. The city stretched before them, alive with movement and light, a kingdom ready to embrace a new era. Kalen turned to her, his hand brushing against hers. "Do you remember the words from your wedding night, the vow you whispered in secret? And now I speak them back to you. Not as a command, not as duty, but as a promise. I will stand with you, always, through shadows, through storms, and through every dawn that follows. You are no longer alone, and neither am I. Together, we are stronger than the darkness that tried to tear us apart." Urindor had survived its darkest night, and two hearts, once bound by fear and duty, had found freedom and love in one another. Kalen and Seraphine stood together, gazing out over the city. They knew that challenges would continue to arise, that shadows would always linger at the edges of the kingdom. Yet for the first time, they faced the future with courage, hope, and the certainty that their hearts were united, strong enough to overcome any darkness. And as the first rays of dawn touched the towers of the palace, they whispered their final vow, not as rulers, but as two souls bound by trust, love, and the unbreakable promise of togetherness. And neither would they. The twilight had passed, the dawn had arrived.